Hello and welcome back to another episode of Exos Heroes. And guys, it's that time of the week yet again. We just got a brand new update and now we're looking at the new Fate Core of the Summer Festa lineup, and this time it's gonna be Girl Summer Yao. So we'll do a quick review of Yao's kit, as well as taking a look at her upgraded Fate Core and see if she is worth your resources and time. As always, if you guys enjoyed this episode, if you find it informative, please leave a like and subscribe, as it will really help the growth of our small channel here. But with that being said, let's jump in. So the first thing, before we even get started with Yao's Fate Core, I think it's worth to bring up the fact that, we do have the Lepin Fate Core banner going on at the same time. And obviously, as part of the compensation, right, we're getting a refund of all the Exos that we spend on that banner. So keep that in mind, guys, right? Because essentially the Lepin banner right now is free for all of us. And for us to give that up and summon Yao is a pretty hefty opportunity cost. So let's keep that in the back of our mind. Obviously, if you already got Lepin, obviously if you've already summoned as much as you can on her, I think it's up to 19 times is the refund limit, then I think Yao would be a good choice. But otherwise, there's a choice to be made here. But with that being said, let's look at Yao and see how she does, right? So she is, first of all, a blue Fate Core. I think at this point, one of the only two Fate Cores that are blue. So it comes with this additional nationality-based buff. What it does is it grants additional statistics to all the heroes from Exos Republic. Grants combat power increased by 2%, which is okay. Attack up by 1%, defense up by 1%, as well as HP up by 6%. So let's think about this. The overall impact just feels relatively low. 1% buff to attack and defense, and 6% buff to HP is just not significant enough to make a real impact in any sort of combat situation, in my opinion. More importantly, similar to the first Guardian Baraka, who is also a blue Fate Core, Yao and her nation of Exos Republic doesn't have the strongest heroes. If we're thinking about the lineup here, I think among the fated heroes, Maggie and Chetty are the best and clearly standout heroes that you might consider pairing up with Yao to get the additional buff there. But other than that, I think Shao Kahn and Shell, I would say, are the two other heroes that are from Exos Republic. And I don't think either one of them are that good of a choice at the moment. And then if you look at the list of legendaries that are from that region, none of them are good. Overall, this feels like a pretty underwhelming buff. And by itself, it's certainly not something that would make Yao worth the resources. But with that being said, let's move on to her skills. So here are a couple of things I would like to point out. Typically, what we've seen with the Summer Festa heroes is that they do get a buff to both of their skills, which is very useful. Not all the Fate Cores does that. However, with Yao, when I was looking at her A1 description here, so if you look at the tooltips on the Fate Core page, it shows that it increases all allies' attack by 28% of her own attack for 8 turns. And this is funny because 28% is lower than the base Yao A1, which is 32%. But if you do go into the hero introduction page and then you look at the skill previews, and here the A1 says it's 31% of own attack for 8 turns. It just, I don't know what's going on here. It seems like she is not really getting that much of a buff. As I mentioned, her base A1 is 32%. It seems like it's going to be around there. I don't think the 28% that they're showing makes sense. Like, why would you, right? Like, why would you have a Fate Core and make this skill worse? That would just be terrible. So overall, her A1, I don't think it's getting a buff. But is this a good skill? I think the buff itself is good. But the problem that I have with this is the mana cost is a bit too high, making it very hard to get off at the beginning of the fight. And obviously, for any sort of damage immunity buffs or attack buffs or critical damage buff, you want to get those out as early as possible, right? You don't want to wait until turn 3 or turn 4 to get that online. You want that to be one of the first skills to go off, so every single one of your hero that moves after that can benefit from it. However, at 3 mana cost, and given that Yao is a machine type hero, it makes it pretty hard for her to pull this off right away, right? So her speed is pretty good, I think it's 109, so she's going to move relatively fast. And if we give her the benefit of the doubt there, assuming that she's going to move at relatively high HP, means she'll probably start her first turn with 1 mana. And if you pair her with a hero that has, let's say, flow of mana, then she'll start with 2 mana, which is still not enough to get this 3 mana cost a 1 off. So in my opinion, I would really love to see the mana cost of the skill go down by 1, even if it's, hey, let's say if it's only 28%, right? If they nerf the buff a little bit, but lowering it to just 2 mana cost, I think that would actually be a pretty good buff. But in this case, again, I don't think it changed at all, and the 3 mana cost is detrimental to the effectiveness of the skill. So overall, not a very good skill. Can be useful in PvE situations where it's not a priority to get this off as soon as possible, but in any PvP situations, you wouldn't want that to be the case. But with that being said, let's move on to her A2. So her base A2 does 360% damage and resets on kills. Now she gets a buff, a solid buff going up to 450% damage and still resets on kill, single target. It's a solid skill, right? The mana cost is 4, so it's relatively high. Machine type, in my opinion, isn't the best when it comes to generating mana. It's not very consistent, especially if the fight drags on. So, yeah, I mean, you're not going to be using this skill all that often, which is kind of sad. It really helps if you do have a mana battery on your teams. Let's say if you have FC Iris, then I think Yao could be using this skill quite often, so that will be good. The turn reset on kills. Again, I think with Yao, I feel like the dev didn't quite know what to do with her. Her A1 is above, her auto attack, you know, like all the other auto attacks, it's not going to do tremendous amount of damage, right? So let's say you get a reset on kills. Like, what are your options? You auto attack another target? Or potentially, you know, buff the rest of your team up, but that requires you to 6-star her, right? Because her A2 is going to cost 4 mana, and then her A1 is going to cost 3. So unless you've already saved up at least 7 mana, you're not going to be able to, you know, even use her A1 on a reset. So it's one reset leads into an auto attack, doesn't feel all that impactful. And lastly, her base passive is just the final hit 2, which is pretty good. I found it especially annoying in PvP situations where I have Battery and someone drops one of my hero to pretty low HP and Battery saves them with a Tranquil passive, and then they just come in with a final hit passive and then kill it off anyway. So it's a nice passive to have for a DPS, but the fact it only generates 1 mana when the target survives, it's not the best when it comes to mana generation. She still have the flat passive, which is good, just like every other Summer Festa Fate course here. You know, it's a good bonus passive to have, but given that Yao only has single target attacks, right? Single target A2 and auto attack, she won't be making any game-changing plays with this passive. It's worth pointing out that she can buff herself with A1 and make use of this skill, so in that sense it's kind of neat, but at the same time you're very likely to have other heroes that can do that, so I wouldn't really think of that as a plus. Yeah, and again, because she has no AoE attack or anything like that, and her attack is pretty high mana cost, I actually don't think, you know, the flop passive works all that well on her. And then lastly, let's look at Summer's Blessing, as we all are very familiar by now. Grants frost damage immunity for 1 turn to all allies at the beginning of the fight, which, you know, cannot be stacked with another Summer's Blessing. And when that gets removed, it increases the target's attack by 50% for 9 turns. So I think, again, this is very solid bonus. Situational, of course, obviously the opposing team needs to have ice damage in order for you to be able to, you know, utilize this. I mean, it's always good to have, there's no downside to that. I think the attack bonus is very interesting here, because if the attack buff from the Summer's Blessing can stack with her A1 attack buff, then you're looking at a pretty substantial increase to your team's damage output. I think that would actually be quite interesting. So if you time her A1 correctly and make sure that buff overlaps with the time when the opponent procs the Summer's Blessing passive off of you, then there's a pretty good chance you can get a total of, I think, 82% buff. That's very good, right? It's almost doubling your team's overall attack damage. So it can be very interesting here. But again, other Summer Festa Fate cores also have this. So if you already have another Summer Festa Fate core such as Iris, then you probably don't want to bring. Then there's absolutely no reason for you to bring Yao for that. Because again, Summer's Blessing passive does not stack, right? So you only get it once. So overall, what do we think? I think, by this point, it's pretty clear. You guys already can tell I'm not very high on Yao. Her overall kit is very mediocre. And again, similar to my issue with Glenn, is the fact that her kit, even though it's mediocre, if it can really take advantage of Summer's Blessing, if it can really take advantage of the flop passive, or if it comes from a better nation and that can really use the national boost, then yeah, I think that would actually be quite good. The problem is her skill doesn't really do that, right? Like her base skills doesn't really take advantage of the flop passive all that well. Summer's Blessing is okay on her, but again, when you look at other Fate cores in the same lineup, you're probably gonna bring other people for that instead of going with Yao. So if she is the only Summer Festa Fate core that you have, maybe I would consider her in certain situations. But most of the time, I would say if you do have another one, at this point, I would almost go with anyone else, maybe with the exception of Glenn. So with that being said, guys, remember that we are getting our Exos back from the Lepin banner. So with that in mind, I cannot recommend anyone to spend too much of your resources on Yao. This is something that, if you get it in the future from just a random summoning, it would be a great bonus, it would be a nice surprise. But at this point, I would highly recommend you to stay away unless you've already got your 19 summons from Lepin's banner, then sure. I mean, she's the only one that's available, right? But of course, we also have other Fate cores coming up in the next couple of weeks, so can always save those resources for the future. But with that being said, that's our review of Girl Summer Yao. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And feel free to check out our other Exo Hero related content on our channel. But otherwise, we will see you in the next episode. Bye bye.